Good morning. I'm Dusky Cherry, President of ITC Midwest. For the third straight year, we are pleased to be the presenting sponsor for the Iowa Ideas Conference and extraordinarily proud of our partnership with the Gazette. As an electric transmission company serving 2/3 of the state, ITC Midwest is invested in and has a very real stake in the future of Iowa. We've supported this conference since its inception because we embrace its mission of gathering hundreds of Iowans together to explore the key questions and the big ideas that will shape the future of our state. ITC Midwest was formed in 2007 to improve electric transmission reliability and increase transmission system capacity in Iowa. And we followed through on that commitment with more than $4.1 billion in capital investments to date. Our investments in the system not only serve the changing needs of customers, they also provide additional capacities to support economic growth and development of low-cost renewable energy resources. Our investments have resulted in a 62% drop in transmission-related outages since ITC acquired the system and began operating it. From extreme weather events such as last year's derecho to the unprecedented transition to renewable energy, from the rapid adoption of electric vehicles to the increasing focus on energy system resilience, the electric utility industry is suddenly in the national spotlight. All of these forces reinforce the critical role of the transmission grid to support the changing landscape and ensure consumers have access to low-cost, clean, and reliable electricity. You know, we often talk about here at ITC about the power of connection, meaning connections are needed to deliver power to communities. There's also tremendous power when people connect to solve problems. Over the next couple of days, I hope you will engage in the breakout sessions, speak up during discussions, and share your ideas to create a brighter future. Open your mind to different points of view as we all work together to come up with the best solutions for making Iowa an even better place now and in the future. I want to thank you for your participation to help shape the future and wish you a great conference.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this session from foster to adoption perspective. I am Janet Rorjo. I'm the feature editor at the Gazette. This is also a passion of mine because I am also, or was, a foster parent for almost 15 years, and I have adopted 4 children from the foster care system. So, and I have been involved in this in different aspects. I used to be a support person for foster parents for the Iowa Foster and Adoptive Parents Association. And now I teach classes, so the people that want to be foster parents. So this is definitely a passion of mine, and we'd like to welcome our 3 panelists to today's session. We have McGee with 4 Oaks, and 4 Oaks contracts with the Iowa Department of Human Services to provide, correct me if I'm wrong, Kay, it is to recruit, train, license, and support foster parents throughout the state of Iowa.
Correct. The only thing I would add is that we support, train, and license adoptive parents as well.
Adoptive parents as well, yes. And then we have Melissa Carlson, who is the Executive Director of Families Helping Families of Iowa, a wonderful resource that we are very lucky to have in our backyard over here in Eastern Iowa. And then we also have Amanda Zhorne, who with her husband, they have been foster parents for, I guess I don't know how many years now, Amanda.
I think we're about at that 15-year mark too.
Okay. And so they have fostered and adopted 3 boys of their own. So with that, we're going to be taking your questions throughout the session. The focus really is on adoption and resources that are out there. First off, Kai, I'd like you to take it. One of the questions that people are always asking me when they find out I'm a foster parent or I've adopted through the foster care system is, what are some of the numbers? How many kids are we looking at in the foster care system? And how many foster parents are there? We always hear that there's a need for more.
Sure, there definitely is always a need for more. So in any given year, we're likely to see anywhere between roughly, let's say, 3,500 to about 6,500 kids spending some time in out-of-home care, and a large proportion of those times that would be foster care or possibly relative and kinship care. And of those children who are spending time in foster care with relatives, foster care is meant to be kind of a permanent, safe, stable placement option for children while their families work through whatever crises resulted in that temporary separation. And in Iowa right now, we would see approximately 70% of those kids returning back to the families that they had been separated from temporarily. And a number of the rest of those youth would go on to need some other form of permanency, or in other words, some sort of a lifetime family connection for them if they are not able to reunify with their own families.
So in Iowa, a lot of times the foster families are the ones who have adopted these children if they can't go back to their birth homes. But more and more, those foster parents are actually the relatives of some of these children. They've been coming through the training and have become licensed themselves to help with these children. Can you talk a little bit about that? We have lots of aunts and uncles and grandparents who are going through the class to get trained. Why should they have to go through this class?
Sure, I think that's not an unrealistic question. If you have somebody who's known a child their entire life, seemingly they shouldn't need a class to know how to take care of that child. That makes a lot of sense. But I think the focus of the class isn't necessarily on how you take care of a child, but it's learning really about the impacts of what that child has experienced that resulted in them being removed from their home, and then, the process of removal. We would kind of collectively refer to some of those experiences as being traumatic. And so I think the purpose of having relative caregivers go through the training is so that they can really learn more details about how trauma affects children, kind of in the short term, medium term, and long term, and feel more prepared to deal with some of those issues emotionally, psychologically, behaviorally, as they pop up in children that they have known oftentimes for their entire lives.
Trauma is kind of the key word when we're talking about this, isn't it? I know my children, I adopted them at a young age, but we've had some significant needs going forward as they've hit different milestones. Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about that? What kind of things have you faced through your journey through this foster adoptive road?
Yeah, definitely. So, talking about those classes that you have initially to get licensed, there's so much good information in them, and you just don't even realize yet how it's going to come into play at that stage. So it's so important to have that foundation, but from there, it's also just like we learn by fire, right? Like, it's just as things come up, we have to figure out how we're going to navigate each thing. And so we have had, I have three boys, all adopted from foster care, and none of them are from the same birth family. So they all have very different stories. They all have different trauma, but they also have different joys and supports from their past as well. And so it's been very interesting to navigate what that looks like for three very different children. And so I think the thing that we've learned most is that you have to be able to take a step back and really look at the situation, what is it for this child? And I have this thing I say sometimes, which is that their reality might not be real, but it's still their reality, right? So they're reacting from a place that is very real to them, even though those of us that maybe don't have that same experience or that same challenge, we can see that it's irrational. We can see it doesn't make sense. And it's difficult sometimes. And I know, Janet, I'm imagining you have this too. As parents, some days we get that right, and some days we don't get that right. Some days I'm like, why can't you guys just see, you are safe now, so stop acting like this. But the reality is, to them, they're not, right? And I have to always, consider that in how I interact with each of them in each situation. So we have had a lot of different types of just challenges and trauma. And so you know, with one of my children, really, it's kind of some intellectual challenges. And so that's one type of parenting and one type of approach that we have to have. And I've got another child that it really like comes out behaviorally, like the behaviors are just, they're big, right? He just goes big and bad. That's his thing. And so we've got to, you know, try to understand what's behind those. It's easy to just see the behaviors, but how do we look past that? How do we look at what's beyond that? And then I've got a child that really, it's the mental health part, right? Like that's really the focus there. And so being able to kind of shift and meet each child where they're at. One point I always like to make when talking about adoption is that, you know, we get a lot of comments, first of all, as if there's something special about us, but there's not. There's something special about the children that are in our home. It's like, there's nothing special about me and what I'm doing, but the kids are doing some really tough work. But people look at it and say, but they're in a good home now, or they're safe now, and they shouldn't have these behaviors, and they should be okay now, because we can look at the situation and think that. But I always tell people, adoption, as much as it's really easy on this side to just see the joy of it, right? Like the best days of my life were the days that I got to adopt my children. That I just get the joy of it. And there's no adoption that happens that isn't loss at the same time. And my kids live that every day. So yes, they got to come and be a part of our family. And I think our family is pretty cool. Like, I think that is a real win, but wrapped up in that, they lost something that was, I mean, just, I can't even imagine. Right. And so I think that one of the things that I always like to make sure to point out is that it's really easy on this side to see the joy of it, but we have to be able to step back and go, yes, but on that side, like no adoption has ever happened where someone didn't lose something first. Right. Like that's just not, it's just, yeah, that's just the reality of it. So.
And it hits these kids at different ages as well. Kyle, you were talking about that the other day. As you know, I've had adopted, my children have come to me at a very young age. The youngest one was 4 months old, but in a lot of respects, that child has been the most challenging. She has some mental health issues. She is struggling with those losses, and she acts out behavior-wise. So she has been the most challenging child I've had. And so one of the focus that we wanted to talk today is about the resources that are out there. Melissa, I want you to talk a little bit about that. You haven't been with families, helping families for very long so far, but since I started being a foster parent, I have seen that organization continue to grow to meet the needs of not only Eastern Iowa, but across the state. Do you want to talk a little bit about the resources that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going on 3 years with Families Helping Families, and we're based here in Cedar Rapids. So obviously the majority of the kids we see are from Lynn County, followed by Johnson County, but we actually serve all 99 counties in Iowa. And the cool thing about that is, you know, yes, you need to drive to our office to utilize our clothing closet, but so many other things are handled remotely via an application on our website and our shoe voucher program. For example, we mail them a voucher that's redeemable at Kohl's for a brand new pair of shoes. They can live in Sioux City or they can live in the Des Moines area. And so we can help those kids regardless of where they live throughout the state. And we have 9 different programs that are available, including the clothing closet, the shoe voucher program. We help with tutoring. We help with activity scholarships and school supplies and lots of different things. Just basically anything that we can think of that's not covered by Title 19. We're always brainstorming and trying to think of different ways. And we think, oh, what about graduation expenses? Oh, no, that's covered. Okay, what else isn't, that we can help that will be of value to these kids and their caregivers. So we're always trying to find new ways to help.
Well, one thing we had at my last class, we had Angela, who you work with, come and talk to our families. And there was a lot of interest in the tutoring program. So when we talk about resources, I think we need to talk a little bit about maybe some of the deficits that some of these children bring, especially in the academic world. Now, is that program been growing for you?
That program honestly is a bit of a challenge because, I mean, obviously the instability of foster care creates a challenge for these kids academically, or it can, especially if they're moving multiple times in multiple homes and schools. But also a lot of times caregivers will start with a place like Sylvan, for example, and not to pick on anyone, but if you go to a national franchise like that, they're very expensive, and it'll be, sometimes we'll get requests for $30,000 to get a kid caught up in math. So the challenging part of that program is we see the value in that program and we really want to help these kids, but we can't spend our entire program budget on one kid. So Angela is actually working really hard to identify private tutors right now that might be a little bit more affordable to work with, and we can kind of create a partnership that way. I know she's reached out to some of the local schools too, just to get ideas. I think Mount Mercy was one of the latest, just to connect with maybe some of those college students that might be able to help, because they, you know, they have the skill set and that should be a lot more affordable.
That's great. Yeah. Hopefully a lot of families take advantage of that, because I continue to see, at least in my own children, you know, they're so dealing with their mental health issues that sometimes the academics get put on the back burner. And so it's a struggle. Like each year they seem to fall a little bit more behind. And so it becomes more and more of a struggle as they get older. So I know that's a huge resource for families.
Yeah, and I mean, statistically, and is it Kay from Four Oaks? She can probably spout the statistics a little better than I can, but the chances, if they're still in foster care, the chances of them graduating high school are pretty low. I think it's around 48 to 50%. So we want to be there and be a resource to try to help with that if we can.
Kai, do you want to talk a little bit about the mental health aspect? Obviously, these kids have gone through trauma. Then there's other kids who, I hate to bring this up, but I just saw the headlines today. In our community, we had another murder of a teen who has stabbed his parents to death. And this is what, in the last 4 months, this is the second one in the last 4 months, I believe. Now, no way am I saying that these kids, I don't know the background. I'm assuming they were not in the foster system whatsoever, but obviously these families have some mental health issues. These kids are struggling with something, and these families are in crisis. And so, and I know a lot of adoptive parents are facing some of those mental health and family crises as well. Can you talk a little bit about how challenging it is for some of these families?
Sure. I think, you know, even a child that goes into an adoptive family home, you know, the few days after they're born, all the way up to kids who haven't experienced the system before and are coming into foster care for the first time as a teenager. One way or the other, the experiences that that particular youth has, or that particular child has, leave a profound and lasting impact on that child. And we know now science has developed far enough that we know that there are significant changes to brain development, for example, and development physically, psychologically, emotionally, when children experience what I would refer to as complex trauma. And then one of the kind of components of that sometimes can be a complicating factor are mental health conditions. And I'm not well-versed enough at all to know if the mental health condition is caused by the trauma or exacerbated by the trauma. And I don't think that's really the question. I think we have children who are coming into our homes and in the homes of our community members who are foster and adoptive parents who are in a tremendous amount of pain. And that pain expresses itself oftentimes behaviorally. It expresses itself by a real need to focus on being hypervigilant and paying, you know, extreme attention to the environment, which makes focusing on a math problem really hard. And so there are lots of different impacts. Sometimes those impacts don't show up for a while. And so things seem to go pretty smoothly in those really early newborn or toddler years, but then a youngster hits 10, 12, 15 years old, and we start seeing some of those residual impacts coming to life. I think some of the significant challenges for both foster and adoptive parents is finding good mental health care that's timely. So getting access to mental health care when they need it means that there needs to be a provider there and available without a huge wait list. It means that, if it's an adoptive family, that means there needs to be an insurance program that is going to support that therapy. If it means that that child needs, possibly a medication prescribed to them and a provider who can prescribe that medication and maintain it and monitor it in an ongoing way. There's a huge deficit of child psychiatrists in Iowa in general, and mental health providers, depending on where you are, can be hard to find. And then I always recommend to foster and adoptive families that when you have the opportunity to work with a mental health specialist who has skills and knowledge around adoption competency, so they're very knowledgeable about some of those lifelong dynamics that come into play with adoption that may not necessarily come into play with another person with a similar mental health condition, but without that background. That is an important element in a therapeutic environment. And so providers can be hard to come by. Folks in rural areas sometimes have to travel long distances to get children to those providers. And if you're like Amanda and you have 3 children, all of whom need to be seen, trying to organize and deal with that transportation and maybe work outside the home, or maybe have other children who have sports schedules and other things going on, trying to keep all of that going is a real struggle for a lot of our families. And I think the other piece of that is that we need responsive services for those moments in time when families hit crisis mode. Maybe things were going along really smoothly for a long period of time, but then all of a sudden out of the blue, there comes this kind of mushroom cloud of crisis, and families don't know who to turn to or where to turn or how to find help. So they kind of start slipping underwater a little bit in terms of how they're functioning as a family. And so those supports that are going to be there and can relate to what's going on, and can facilitate that kind of immediate crisis response is so important, but can be difficult to come by depending on where you are in the state. And then the last thing I will say is that when kids are, particularly in foster care, if they're moving through multiple foster homes, which nobody wants to see that happen, but it does happen, that's the reality. So for example, if a child is in a home in Cedar Rapids and then for some reason ends up in a home in Des Moines, transferring that therapy or trying to keep them with the same mental health provider so that they can get that same consistent care with the person they've developed a trusting relationship with becomes a really challenging thing. So you see them then starting therapy with multiple different providers as they're moving around to different environments. And so that always, I think, is a challenge as well. I think technology can help us solve some of these challenges, but it takes almost a collective community response as well as a collective legislative response and an overall system response to make sure these families have access to what they need when they need it.
Yes, I know there's been a lot of discussions about the lack of pediatric psychiatrists, not just in Iowa, but across the nation. Has anybody heard of anything to try to help resolve that? I know organizations have tried to get people to move here. There's attempts to try to educate our own so that they'll stay here, but we haven't had a lot of luck. And so, when I take a kid in for foster, and Amanda, maybe you've experienced the same thing, they usually have some mental health issues going on, but the wait to get in to see somebody is, months and months, anywhere from 6 to 9 months it can take. I had a gal who joined me from another foster home, and we tried to get in to see some people right away. And she had already left my home and was in a PMIC institution when I finally started getting calls back from some of these organizations. So are you aware of anything at all that the state is doing, or maybe somebody else is aware of what we can do? That's one of the issues, I guess, that Iowa really needs to address.
You know, I'm not aware of anything. I know as I've interacted with child and adolescent psychiatrists, one of the things that I consistently hear is that it can be challenging working for different insurance companies with different reimbursement rates. But included in that would be, of course, Medicaid. And that would affect children in foster care and those who are adopted who are reliant on Medicaid. Because I think child psychiatrists would complain that the reimbursement rate for their services from different insurance providers or from Medicaid are insufficient, you know, compared to what they could make treating a different population of people. And so I think that contributes possibly to the shortfall. I do think there are larger system initiatives that could help with making the changes. I personally am not currently aware of those initiatives happening, but I certainly hope other people are aware and can help us be more aware of them.
What's been your experience at trying to get in to see different psychiatrists and therapists?
Yeah, so I definitely have experienced what you were talking about. And I think that the thing that happens, Dana, I assume you've had this too. These kids come with mental health concerns. Also, when they come to us, a lot of times we've just stirred a lot of that up, right? Like we've just added the trauma, because honestly, being removed from your family, no matter what that situation is, that's another trauma, right? And so they often already have stuff in play, and then we're taking them at a time where there's like an added confusion and instability. But the other thing that we've experienced is with that, a lot of times they are on medication, and if you can't get in with someone, you can't get the medication. So on top of it, they sometimes end up in a situation where they are not getting the medication that can help them possibly just try to manage and get through all of the other pieces. So that has definitely been a challenge. You know, I feel like we've been fortunate in that we've been able to sometimes find a pediatrician that will see them to at least help with the medication piece until we can get in. We've also had that thing where you're waiting several months to get them into the support that they need at a time when they need it so desperately. I don't know what the solution is. You know, obviously having it available is the solution, but there's no magic way to just fix that. One of the things I will say is that, you know, mental health challenges are not unique to kids in the foster care system or kids that are adopted. And one of the things that I've always been grateful for and aware of is that I do have kind of this like built-in network and support system. And sometimes I wonder, like, would this be more difficult if I was navigating this without ever having gone through the PS math classes, or I think they maybe changed the name of them, but and having those connections and having people that are checking in on us, because we have people checking in on us all the time, right? And having a social worker that we can turn to and say, like, I have 3 days of meds and I can't get them in anywhere, help me solve this. And so it's like this weird situation where, like, yes, I think we oftentimes are dealt this big challenge, but part of the package is a better support than if maybe we stumbled into this a different way. And so that's something I remind myself too, is that maybe this moment is challenging, but at least I've been gifted this support to go with it. And, you know, we've got people on this panel that are a part of that, right? Like, I can go to Four Oaks, I can go to Families Helping Families, I can turn to DHS worker, I can find someone to help me navigate it. That being said, sometimes there just isn't an answer, and I feel like sometimes we've just, like, if no one's available to see your child, no one's available to see your child. If you've exhausted what someone can do, you've exhausted what someone can do. And so that gets frustrating. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is. And I feel like it's an imperfect system because it's a system that shouldn't have to exist, right? Like, the whole premise of this system is flawed. These are kids that can't be with their families. Like, there's no way to make that be a perfect system. And so I get just as frustrated as everyone else, but I remind myself of that. Like, the whole premise here is so flawed that there's no magic way to fix it, because it shouldn't exist, right? Like, in a perfect world, foster care isn't a thing. In a perfect world, adoption isn't a thing. Like, we all get to be with our families. So so that was a aside that didn't really answer your question, aside from that. Yeah, we've definitely had those same struggles. Feel like I'm dealing with a little bit of it at the moment, where we just can't get to the resources we need, or we've exhausted the resources that are available. But at least I never have felt alone during the process. I've always felt like I've got a whole team, working with me, including Janet, who has been on the phone with me, and one of my support people, right? Because she has a lot of knowledge and is able to support that way too. So I guess I hope that there's things in the works that are going to make that a little bit easier. I just don't know what the magic solution is until we just have, I don't know, fewer kids in the system or more people available to be in those support roles. So.
Well, Kai, one of the things, the whole system is challenging to begin with, but then you throw in a pandemic on top of it. And then in our area, we have the derecho. What has the impact of that had on the foster adoptive system? Is there more kids coming into the system? Is there fewer kids? What about foster families? Because full disclosure, after 2020 was a very challenging year for myself and our family. And so I just shy of 15 years turned in my license at the beginning of 2021. I just couldn't imagine taking another child with everything going on. So, but what has the impact been on the system?
So I think when the pandemic kind of first initially happened, we had kind of the first kind of excruciating thing for folks to go through was the shutdown, right? When we kind of shut everything down and everybody was, kind of quarantining and isolating in their home. That was really challenging for kids and families. And it got a little bit better as things kind of started opening up again. But at the same time, what that did for foster and adoptive families was it injected a bunch of uncertainty into their lives. So for our families, and many of the struggles are the same for every family, right? Having kids unexpectedly home for 2 weeks because they have to quarantine, or having, having to be alert to potential exposures, and then thinking about, the people that are in a circle around your extended family, and wanting to make sure you're not accidentally exposing, somebody else, and trying to navigate working from home for those folks where that's a possibility for them, while they're also trying to maintain their child's schooling, while they're, have a child who is having a temper tantrum and they're on the phone in a critical business meeting. Those are all things that our foster and adoptive families were experiencing along with every other family. And then you definitely had some complications with the derecho and communications being cut off for families for a while, being without power for a long time. But overall, what I would say in the pandemic, although we did see a dip in the number of kids that were coming into the child welfare system, in part because there weren't as many people laying eyes on them, right? Teachers at school weren't seeing them. They weren't making trips to the family doctor. And so there were fewer reports, I think, probably going into the child abuse hotline. And I think that has since changed. But for our foster and adoptive families, what we saw was families who might have considered starting the process to become a foster and adoptive family tabled that. They put it on the back burner and decided not to move forward with that for at least a couple of years until things seemed to kind of smooth out with the pandemic. For families that had already been licensed and maybe had kids in the home or maybe hadn't yet accepted kids in the home, a lot of them decided they could not accept a new placement into their home, considering all that they were trying to deal with. And then for other families, it just, I think, got exhausting, the juggling and all of the stuff that daily life consists of now during a time of pandemic. And then added to that, kids who might be experiencing significant behavioral challenges or emotional reactions, and trying to navigate through all of that became overwhelming and exhausting for some families who made the decision, as your family had to, that they needed to either close their license or just go for, an extended period of time of not having somebody new enter their home. But it's also made it hard for us as professionals to get out. The biggest, most important piece of the pie is getting out there and getting into the public's awareness that we desperately need more foster homes. We always need more foster homes. We will continue to need foster homes until child abuse no longer occurs. And that message needs to get into the public mind so that those who feel called to serve are willing and able to do so. And the pandemic limits our opportunities to get out there with that message to the public and let them know you're needed. If you were ever needed, now is the time. And so that's been a barrier and a challenge for us to work through. I think it's been hard on families to try to figure out how to make sure kids placed in their home for foster care still get to have their family interactions, their visits with their birth families that make reunification possible. I think it's hard for professionals who have to worry about protecting themselves as well as protecting the people into whose homes they're going into. So those are all added pressures that are a little bit sometimes on top of what maybe the average family in our country is dealing with. So a lot of compassion and empathy for folks who got to a place where they needed to kind of shut down for a while and take care of themselves, self-care, and really relying on those supports is, sometimes for a lot of our families, the only thing that's getting them through. And I'm very thankful for organizations like Melissa's, because I think for some of those relative caregivers who have children placed with them, who maybe haven't gone through the whole licensing process yet and don't have those professionals attached to them, they're relying almost solely on organizations like Melissa's. And sometimes those, I think, are the only life raft underneath those families, helping keep them afloat. So my appreciation for families helping families.
Yeah, I would say that relative placement is 80% of the families that we see in here. I mean, I think we had 2 today, just today.
Mm-hmm.
And to echo some of the things that you just said, as far as throughout the pandemic, we definitely saw lower numbers in new placements. And the ones that we did see there for a couple months were all just newborn babies, and then any siblings that were at home in that same family. But it's definitely picked up. I would say since school started, when the kids went back to school, we're seeing a lot more people in here, first timers with the new placements for the first time. So
Yeah, I've talked to a number of grandparents who never anticipated having to raise their grandchildren, and some of them may have been close to retirement or in retirement, and so they have concerns about raising a small child during retirement. And so yeah, I do hear concerns from families about that.
Yeah, we have a set of grandparents that took in 4, I think, in June, and they're probably in their late 50s, early 60s. And, that wasn't their plan to just go from 0 to 4. But we're happy that we're here as a resource for them.
Great. Well, I haven't seen any questions. Is there anybody out there that has questions for any of our panelists? Maybe there's somebody out there that is thinking about fostering.
It says chat disabled. Are they supposed to put them in the chat?
Yeah, they're supposed to work in.
Does it say that for anyone else?
Yeah, we haven't had any questions. Does anybody have any questions?
But I think it's closed for questions. At least it is on my side. It says chat disabled. Does it look like that for you guys?
Let's see.
We have the chat available for people watching in Huba.
Oh.
And then I'm sending them over to Janet when they come through. Unfortunately, we haven't had any questions yet.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, thanks for checking though.
So Janet, while we're waiting, one of the things I was thinking about too, when we talk about, all of these, when you can get the resources, when they are available, and then you end up with all these appointments and trying to juggle, and you're also trying to help these kids have some normalcy in their childhood. So you do have the sports schedule, which a lot of families are familiar with how much work that can be to juggle multiple kids. And then you also have like 3 therapy appointments a week on top of it. And one of the things that we have had phases where we've just had to say, like, part of therapy is getting to be like, part of what we need for mental health is getting to be a part of the things that the kids should be a part of. So like, we reached a point where the only time to fit in therapy, because keep in mind, that's got to come out of your day somewhere. So you're either missing class because you're getting pulled out of school, you're going over dinner time and you're disrupting your family's routine. Or what we found a lot is like, we would do evening appointments, and then our kids would like not be able to go to the birthday party, or, like they just wouldn't get to do normal kid things. So on top of it, like everything you try to do to help them is probably taking something else away from them, And so we have had phases where we have just had to put some of the more traditional mental health support on hold. Like, we partner with professionals, we make sure it's a responsible choice, but say, we're going to have a chunk of time where you guys get to go like be with friends, and you get to go participate in a sports, a sports season, which you can't do if 3 nights a week you're taking kids to therapy, they can't also be playing basketball, right? So that is an interesting like piece of trying to balance it too, is like, we need those supports to be there, but also sometimes like just being able to be a kid, right? Because that's a piece of this too, right? We get so focused on those extra supports they need. And I know I do this anyways. I have moments where I go, oh wait, also like I have like a teenager who maybe just needs to get to hang out with his friends, like have pizza and play video games. Like maybe he doesn't need to sit and talk about his trauma right now. Maybe he needs to be able to pretend for 2 hours that he's just a regular teenager hanging with his friends. So,
Yep.
Yeah, we've definitely done the same. We've taken breaks, from services for a while, just to take a break from it. And you're right, sometimes talking about it constantly is maybe not as helpful as, joining soccer, and just having fun, because we all know that exercise is a huge release and can boost, mental health as well. So yeah, we've done the same.
Yeah. We've just decided that's part of the mental health, like that's part of the resources out there, right? And so taking advantage of those, which are sometimes easier to get into than a therapist, right? So, yep.
I would like to see, and that's where some of those situations I think is where technology can be helpful. Rules that previously had been really restrictive for like telehealth got loosened up during the pandemic. And quite honestly, I hope they stay loosened up, because I think just even saving the transportation and making it makes more providers more available, even if that provider is at a distance from where you live. That child is still able to get those services they need, and it isn't quite as much of a hardship on the family. They don't have the transportation expense and all of that stuff to figure out. So that's been a positive impact from the pandemic, I think, that I hope remains. And then the other thing that is something that's kind of a constant concern for me, besides the constant need for more foster families, is I do see a significant lack of daycare, and it's more severe in some parts of the state than in others, but particularly in very small towns or in rural communities where there's maybe only one daycare provider. If they're full, then how do foster parents find a daycare for their child, or even an adoptive parent? One of the things, or one of the potential impacts of trauma, is that it may not endure for an entire lifetime, but it does set kids back, I think, developmentally a little bit. It sets them back a little in terms of emotional development and social skill development, and their ability to have healthy relationships and their ability to have good judgment. So we have a lot of kids who are too old to go to daycare, but when their parents work outside the home, they need after-school programs to be readily available. They need school break or summer holiday programs because they're not able to be home alone in a safe way, independent of adult supervision. But if that foster or adoptive parent needs to go to work outside the home, where does that resource come from? And I think I'm amazed at the people, grandparents, relatives, foster adoptive parents who patchwork something together to work for them. But it feels like it shouldn't be so hard, right? It feels like those resources should be a lot more common than they are. And for us, that can be one of the biggest deterrents in finding we may have a foster home available, but if we have a kid who, is too old to qualify for daycare, but can't be left without adult supervision, that foster home may not consider taking them if a resource that can support that child during the hours that foster parent has to be at work. And so that would be just a huge ask for me to anybody that's listening or to the state in general that is a serious gap in our system that needs to be addressed.
Well, and I've run into that as well, Amanda, you have too, because you get a new foster child and they have some behavior issues or mental health issues. And I mean, you don't know them very well. Are you just going to give them the keys to your house and then they let themselves in and everything's hunky-dory, So, but then again, I've had kids who had so many behaviors that maybe the more traditional camps, it's not appropriate for them. And while I was able to cobble something together myself, I know it's been a barrier for people for taking some kids that age, especially those middle school years. That seems to be a real challenge.
Yep.
And I had one child that I was able to, Lynn County has a special program, or they did have a special program that would help this child who had some serious behavior and mental health issues. And so he was covered for the summer. So I was able to keep him in our home for a while. But that is a huge problem. I would agree. And it's something that I guess we probably need to, work with DHS and the state to try to find more options and resources for these families, because it is preventing families from taking in an age group which you're already struggling to try to find homes for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as a family that does take in from, we take in older children, so that age group, that's a real piece of it. And we definitely, we both work outside the home, my husband and I, and we definitely have found that to be one of the bigger challenges, and has made us at times not been able to say yes to a child. Yep. Because we're also leaving them at home then without us there with our other children. And if there's any sort of uncertainty in terms of if that's going to be safe or not, that's a risk that we can't take the kids that we have. So yeah, I agree. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a place where I think there has to be a solution. I used to joke, we didn't know if we'd be able to maintain both of us working because of that exact thing. And I said, well, maybe I just stop working, the way that I am, and create a program for other people in the same boat, right? And I just take them all, I'll just have all of them with me for a while, because it is a real barrier. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the programs that I've seen that, pop up usually through the efforts of community members, kind of coming together and saying, okay, this is a problem, and seeking grant funding. But the problem is then if that grant funding runs out, then that program can't stay viable any longer. So, and I think another one of those things that's more of a hardship in a rural community that has fewer resources, and in school districts that have fewer resources to create that type of programming. I think that really is, that there should be a fix for that, right? There's a fix for that involves dollars and political will and social will to get it done. But that is a fix that would make things, I think, a lot easier for a lot of folks.
To raise a child, and being a foster adoptive parent, that is so spot on. I don't know what I would have done without the therapists in our life, the BHIS workers, the University of Iowa Centers for Disabilities, Whitworth Children's Therapy, and Families Helping Families. You get that call late at night, they don't have any clothes, and you don't have any clothes. I used to joke and say, hey, like you could always run to Walgreens or Walmart. They're open 24/7 to get diapers if you need to. But with the pandemic, even that changed, So sometimes a quick call to somebody at Families Helping Families can help you get some of the things that you need. But yeah, we're very lucky in our immediate area, but you go a little bit further, north, south, east, or west, and I don't know what it would be like trying to access these resources. Families are driving hours just to get in to see maybe a therapist at Tanager or someplace like that. So yeah, I do feel very lucky that we do have some resources around here.
I think I want to mention, because we're getting closer to it, that November is National Adoption Month. So that is a time where we see a lot more attention paid to the needs of adoptive children, but also the needs of adoptive families. And I wish that level of attention was directed year round. But I think that it's important to acknowledge that, and maybe because, for so many things, it's such a bittersweet thing. Amanda talked about the fact that no adoption can happen without there having first been significant loss, right? And that may be true for the adoptive families themselves as well, who are moving through adoption situations, and grandparents who are adopting children. They raised their kids, they did their job, they thought they were done, and now I've got these 4 grandkids, and I need to be their forever family. So I think it's important to acknowledge all of those things, the joys for families, the joy of creating that permanent lifetime connection for a child where maybe there was none before, but at the same time as acknowledging that deep level of loss that's there. I do also kind of want to point out or talk about the fact that there are post-adoptive services available for families who have completed particularly an adoption from the foster care system. But there are other adoption support services available too. There are support groups. There are adoption support workers who can work with families on a very voluntary basis, really to help them be kind of an emotional support and a coach and a mentor and somebody who can guide them into finding the resources that do exist in their immediate area. So I kind of want to raise those folks up, especially as we get closer to National Adoption Month and celebrate the work that they do day in and day out with adoptive families across Iowa. There's a huge number of adoptive families in Iowa, and that's a very fortunate thing. But I think a lot of times adoptive families, by the time they get to the point where that adoption's been finalized, they just want to be done. They want to be done with professionals. They want to be done with the system. They just want everybody out of their house for a hot minute so they can just celebrate being a family. And that's one of the things that I like about some of those adoption supportive services, because they can be really kind of as needed. Everything's good and smooth with our family right now. We're okay. You don't need to call us every week and check in or anything. But please be there when I call you. And please put me in contact with other adoptive families, because nobody's going to understand what I'm going through better than somebody who is also going through it themselves. So I think those support groups and those natural supports that can step in when professionals are no longer involved are super key. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, because we're getting close to that time of year where it's something to be aware of and celebrate.
Well, in terms of that, Kai, maybe you can explain to some of the people to be eligible for those services, post-adoption support. The adoption has to be a special needs adoption. And so there's different qualifications for that. And not every child necessarily qualifies for that. But I think through the last 15 years, I've noticed that the state is more and more willing to, provide health insurance for these kids so that they do qualify for a special needs adoption. Is that because of the recognition of the trauma piece that can impact these children and families as they, grow?
Yeah, I think there is, there can be some confusion, I think, between the financial pieces and the supportive pieces. So I think part of what you're talking about is an adoption subsidy. So when families adopt from the child welfare system, if they adopt a child who this criteria of special needs, and just to talk a little bit about what special needs actually means, like for some of us, if we hear the term special needs, we may call to mind an image or a picture that we think that word means. And I want to be clear that in the field of foster care and adoption, special needs really refers to a child who has some of those trauma impacts or has something that they're experiencing that is more difficult than, the average child. So, and oftentimes it's something that might make them hard to match with a foster family or an adoptive family. So kids who are part of a larger sibling group who want and need to stay together in the same adoptive home, kids who are over the age of 8, especially in the field of adoption, because there's so much desire and focus on adopting younger children, that sometimes those kids that are age 8 and older kind of get overlooked in the fact that they also are equally deserving of a forever family. Kids who have significant mental health diagnoses or behavior challenges or medical diagnoses all could fit that criteria of being special needs. And if a family adopts a child who meets that definition from the foster care system, they would be eligible for a monthly adoption subsidy from the state of Iowa that would continue, I want to say, until that child is of age, reaches the age of majority in Iowa. The supportive services on the flip side of that are not dependent on any financial status or anything else. All that's needed is that an adoption from the foster care system has been finalized. And those adoption support services are, as I said, those voluntary, the listening ear, the coaching, the mentoring, helping families find local resources, running support groups, providing libraries of books and movies and that sort of stuff that can help folks understand adoption a little bit better. That stuff is available universally to everybody who has completed an adoption from the child welfare system.
Great. Well, we have just a few more minutes to go. If anybody has any questions, please, we can try to get them answered. Kai, what if anybody here is interested in fostering or adopting from the system? What would be their first step?
Definitely hit our website, www.iowafosterandadopt.org. You can find that same webpage by going through the 4 Oaks, www.4oaks.org. And on either one of those pages, you can find information about foster care and adoption, as well as relative and kinship caregivers can find information for them as well about resources, as well as, if they are considering going through becoming licensed or approved for adoption. So I would definitely encourage folks to visit our website. There's also a phone number for every part of the state that you're from, that if you're not comfortable moving through the web, you can pick up the phone and give us a call. And I don't have that phone number memorized. I wish I did, but I can provide it for folks afterwards if needed.
And I just want to say, I always like to advocate for people that maybe, advocate for more families to get involved. Getting involved with foster care can look different. It can look how it works best for your family. I don't know what the current needs are. Again, folks could speak to that better, but there's respite, there's, taking certain ages, I mean, you set it up to work for you and your family. And I think that that's important to know, because I don't know that I realized that before I got involved. And the second thing I'm going to say is, just in case anyone needs to hear it, because my husband said it to me when I needed to, when we were looking at foster care, and I wasn't sure because of the standard, but what if they go back to the families and that's going to be too hard on me? And I love my husband because he's direct with me and he's blunt and he just says what I need to hear. And he said to me, the fact that it may be hard on you seems like a really poor excuse for a kid to not have a family. And that was the moment I said yes. And so I'm just saying it because that's what I needed to hear. So if anyone else needs to hear it, that being said, do your homework. It's not easy. It's not all roses, right? But if that's what's holding you back and you needed to hear that, I just want you to hear that. Like, don't let a kid not have a family because you may have a rough day around it. Yeah.
Right. And like you said, there's different ways that people can get involved. And I'm sure Melissa would say, hey, look, help, come over here. I mean, you need volunteers for the clothing closet. It can be simply as people emptying their closets, finding those clothes and getting them to you. Then you have a lot of different volunteer opportunities coming up throughout the year, including if anybody's interested in tutoring, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The clothing closet, we always need help. We will take your kids' clothes, especially teen clothes. They're very hard to come by because people think that we want women's clothes and we don't. We want teen clothes. And then we have our big Winter Wonderland holiday celebration in person, fingers crossed, in December. And we need a little over 100 volunteers for that. So, and that's a great opportunity because sometimes if you're here at the office, you don't see the kids. A lot of times we just see the caregivers, but at that event, you get to see the kids and you get to see them having fun, and it's really cool.
Great. Well, I want to thank all our panelists for being here today, and I want to thank people that tuned in. There's an awful lot of different sessions going on for Iowa Ideas, and so maybe if people weren't able to stop and listen to us live, they'll be able to listen to this some other time. And I know at the Gazette, anybody wanted to reach out, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to people about my experience. And it is a passion of mine. And I'd like to make a little plug for the Gazette. They have been absolutely wonderful in supporting me through my journey.
Awesome.
Didn't mean to get emotional there, but.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It was nice to talk to all of you.